Welcome back, everyone. We're ready for another deep dive, and this time we're going to be tackling a pretty big concept, I think.
Yeah.
Forgiveness.
A big one.
And we're going to be looking at it through, well, we always look at these things through some kind of source material.
Right.
And this week's is a devotional text called Forgiven.
Okay.
Which, draws its insights from the Bible, but, it specifically looks at how forgiveness kind of plays out between us, humanity,
right,
and God.
Yeah.
And I think there's some really interesting stuff in here.
Yeah, no, forgiveness is something that you see in every culture, every belief system grapples with this idea of like,
Right.
What does it mean to forgive? How do we do it?
Right.
But the source really focuses on, the Christian perspective of that.
Okay.
And, it starts with Jesus' sacrifice as this ultimate act of reconciliation with God. And it uses this really powerful phrase from Corinthians that's like, he who knew no sin became sin for us.
Yeah, I've always kind of struggled with that phrase a little bit.
Sure.
Can you kind of break that down a little bit?
Yeah.
For me? Like, what does that actually mean in the context of forgiveness?
It's a complex theological concept.
Yeah.
But it's essentially suggesting that Jesus, who was sinless, took on the burden of all of humanity's sin in order to bridge this gap between us and God.
Okay.
And it's through his sacrifice that we then have the opportunity for forgiveness and reconciliation.
Okay, so that kind of sets the stage theologically.
Right.
And then it goes into some pretty like heavy-hitting examples from the Bible
Yeah.
to illustrate these points.
Absolutely.
Like, the parable of the prodigal son, which always, I don't know, sometimes that one feels a little too good to be true to me.
Well, it's a parable, so it's meant to teach a lesson rather than be a literal event.
Right.
But the core message there is about this boundless nature of forgiveness, right? Like the son makes all these terrible choices, squanders everything, and yet when he comes back humbled and repentant, the father doesn't hesitate to forgive him.
Yeah, it's that unconditional love and acceptance.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. And just this idea that we can screw up monumentally and still be welcomed back.
Right.
Which is, it's a pretty great feeling.
It's a beautiful idea, yeah.
But then there's the story of King David.
Right.
Which I think takes kind of a different turn.
Totally.
Because here's this guy who's considered righteous. He's close to God.
Yeah.
And he makes some really awful choices.
Yeah, he does.
I mean, betrayal.
Yeah.
Adultery. He even covers it up with murder.
Right, and that's where it gets really interesting because the devotional uses this example to show that, forgiveness doesn't erase consequences.
Oh, interesting.
Right, like David is forgiven.
Right.
But he still faces serious repercussions for his actions.
Right.
And it kind of underscores that accountability is still important.
Yeah.
Even within the context of forgiveness.
Okay, so forgiveness isn't about pretending things didn't happen.
Right.
Or sweeping things under the rug.
Exactly.
It's more about acknowledging the wrong was done.
Yeah.
And offering grace.
Yeah.
But understanding that there's still a ripple effect.
Right. There are consequences
from those actions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I guess that kind of brings us to, the thief on the cross.
Right.
Which is like probably one of the most dramatic forgiveness scenes in the Bible.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's like literally a last-minute plea for mercy.
Yeah.
And yet Jesus offers it freely.
It's incredible.
It's pretty powerful stuff.
That's powerful.
So I guess thinking about all of this and connecting it back to our own lives. I mean, haven't we all been in situations where
oh, absolutely,
we needed to forgive someone?
Yeah.
Or maybe we needed to be forgiven ourselves.
Of course, yeah.
That's not true.
I mean, forgiveness is like this universal human experience, and it's rarely easy.
It's not.
It requires you to confront pain, possibly let go of anger and resentment.
Right.
And really make yourself vulnerable.
Yeah.
But I think there is also just this profound sense of liberation that can come with it.
Yeah.
Both for the person offering the forgiveness and the person receiving it.
Right. And it's interesting because it's like, it's hard.
It's hard.
But there's also that sense of
freedom,
liberation on the other side.
Totally.
Which is powerful.
Absolutely.
And, this devotional really emphasizes that there's no sin too great for God's forgiveness.
Right. Doesn't matter.
Which is...
doesn't matter what you've done.
Yeah. That's a pretty big statement, And they paint this picture of God kind of patiently waiting for us to come home.
Right.
No matter how far we've strayed.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Which I think leads to kind of a big question.
Yeah, if this is the case.
If this is true.
If forgiveness is always there,
right?
Both from a spiritual perspective and in our own lives, what prevents us from actually seeking it,
right,
or offering it,
right?
More readily.
What's holding us back?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
What is it?
I think that's a really deep dive for all of us to do on our own.
Absolutely,
is to kind of try to figure out what are those things that are preventing us from either
seeking or offering,
asking for forgiveness, or giving it.
Totally. And maybe through these stories and understanding them more deeply, we can start to break down some of those barriers
and experience that freedom.
Yeah.
That we're just talking about.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah, I think so.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See ya.